existing period that finished last year up to the new period that has started now. And then in terms of the monitoring and verification, the standard difficulties that member states face is the difficulty with the data or verification requirements, lack of staff and complexity of requirements. The whole project is based on a lot of knowledge exchange process between member states, technical support. So you can see some of the topics that were selected in the first period, and this is what's happening in the second period now. There is a big demand, let's say, from member states to understand more about the Article 7 climate targets or side effects of the alternatives and the energy efficiency obligation schemes, setting up monitoring and verification schemes, understanding better additionality and materiality. Other elements that we've received is more knowledge on how to set up an energy efficiency fund, banking and borrowing rules, how the ESCOs are working, and so forth, on more practical and technical aspects. Now, what we have also, we provide is a platform. It's called Article 7 EED.eu, and this platform will be the key, the key knowledge hub for all the type of Article 7 information on policies, on performance of member states, on solutions for resolving problems and during the implementation, also on the type of policies, but also in the terms of MRV, monitoring and verification. So we go into very detailed aspects, and I hope you find it useful. That's how it looks like, just to get an idea of the platform. And now, why we're here today, and first of all, we've all been facing the COVID-19 for the last year, and a bit more than a year now. We have seen that the COVID-19 has had a lot of effect on the energy efficiency, and this also reflects on the outcomes of the energy efficiency policies under the Article 7 of the EED. Before we set the floor to all of you as key experts in the field, which you can explain to us your experiences, we have carried out a short survey with my colleagues under the ENSMOV project on what we've seen and what is being expected so far from the Article 7. What we see is that national authorities mainly are focusing on the short-term recovery now, so we have missed a bit the long-term perspective, because we all expect the amounts from the recovery funds which for the next 3 years. Then on the market, almost all market players have reported issues with market activities, payments, implementation aspects, and stability of the companies. It's difficult to work with the end customers. There is no proximity and restriction of access. And then for the end users is that the revenue and year-end profits reduction has eliminated all investments not covered by financing. So where there was no financing, it was very difficult to implement something. And then on the policy aspects, we have had a lot of delays on the preparation of the programs. This has to do also with administrative aspects and all the COVID-19 delays. Of course, there is a lot of optimism in the field that all actors in the energy efficiency market are optimistic. That that's the general feeling we got. That the investments and projects will be as before crisis in 2 and 4 years. And we also expect, of course, the shifting up again of the energy demand, so also which will also lead to more energy efficiency, due also to the firm regulatory framework that we do have now in Europe with the 2021-2030. So I will, you can now contact us here. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, and I don't want to take more of the time from our high-level speakers here. Starting directly with our colleagues from the European Commission, Anna-Katerina Weidenbach. So, Anna-Katerina, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Anna. Thanks a lot for the kind introduction, Lassis. I hope you are all doing well and coping well with the teleworking. I would like just to briefly kick off with the question how we identified impact of the COVID-19 crisis. So I'm pretty sure you know that in our progress report on energy efficiency with regard to the data for 2020, we assessed that there is an impact of the COVID-19 crisis, which has significantly affected the energy demand. As a result of this, the 2020 energy efficiency targets may be met, even though there were insufficient measures in place before the crisis. We assume that this is hopefully just a temporary situation, and it's unfortunate that this energy demand decrease has not been driven by structural measures. We assume that it's very likely that the energy consumption will be back towards the pre-COVID-19 crisis levels, and I think we all agree that this is not sustainable. As regards the existing 2030 targets, we also identified an ambition gap in the NECPs, and we are currently evaluating and reviewing the energy efficiency directive, and we identified various bottlenecks that should be addressed in the upcoming EED revision. From our perspective, it's also a lack of ambitious or binding targets for energy efficiency, and also regarding flexibility and weaknesses in the legislation, this is also contributing to bottlenecks. And partially, there's also, let's say, not enough political commitment in terms of delayed implementation of energy efficiency policies. So we see the lack of ambition in the NECPs as a strong reason for strengthening the EU measures. And we are also identified, also with regard to the energy savings obligation and feedback from stakeholders, that we still have significant cost-effective savings potential in the member states. And these savings potentials need to be unlocked. These potentials we assessed are based on the existing technologies and not on their future development. Also in the climate target plan, which was published last autumn, we identified the need to significantly step up energy efficiency efforts. So in the climate target plan, we called for an increase to 36 to 37% of final energy consumption and 39 to 41% of primary energy consumption in 2030. Regarding Article 7, we couldn't identify any impact, measurable impact on the progress of member states, but the progress report will be, or the progress assessment will take place in April 2023 after the submission of the integrated national energy and climate reports. But I think it's also a good opportunity in this conference just to recall the importance of the full implementation of the energy savings obligation. It's one of the key measures. It was already one of the key measures in the period 2014 to 2020, and it will remain one of the key drivers to ensure the achievement of ambitious energy efficiency targets. Regarding Article 7, we also think that this obligation should play a key role in alleviating energy poverty, and this is more than ever needed. The COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the urgency of addressing energy poverty if we are to create a social Europe. And in this regard, in this regard, we hope that member states will also take the chance in the framework of the recovery and resilience plans to link the energy savings obligation with the need to alleviate and address energy poverty, but also to support low and medium income households and to allow them to be active players in a green transition. With regard to Article 7, we also think that the energy efficiency first principle will also help to overcome any shortfalls on the energy savings obligation. As you might know, we are currently working on a recommendation and guidance on the practical implementation of the energy efficiency first principle. And if our hierarchy agrees, this should be adopted together with the EED revision. And the energy efficiency first principle, together with an ambitious energy savings obligation implemented at member states level, we think that this is crucial to overcome any impacts from the COVID-19 crisis. And that's it from my side.
Thank you, Anne. I know that you have to go for another meeting right now. So if there is any question right now, let's take a couple of questions to Anna. You can just raise hands and come back to us. Otherwise, okay, And I think it was very clear, and the framework you are describing is quite clear, and I think it's going to be quite challenging summer for all of you at the Commission with the new legislation. All right, so if there is any question coming back to you and for the Commission, we'll keep it up and send you an email afterwards, and you can always come back to the speakers. Thank you very much for the time, and we're moving then directly with the IEA. Thanks a lot, Sana.
Thank you.
Then we give the floor to Yannick Monschauer from the International Energy Agency.
Yeah, good morning also from my side. Let me just share my screen. Okay, hope you can see it now. So I would like to share with you some insights from the analysis we did on energy efficiency in the context of the COVID-19 crisis for our Energy Efficiency 2020 report. So that's more of a global perspective, and also some fresh insights from recent or soon-to-be published reports, such as the Global Energy Review, the Global EV Outlook, and the World Investment Report. Let me start with an overview of energy intensity. The pandemic setback already weakened progress on energy efficiency that we've observed in the past, and energy intensity is now expected to have improved at the slowest rate in 10 years, at only 0.5% in 2020. To explain how this might have happened, we now have a closer look at the three main factors that shaped energy intensity during the crisis. So that's energy efficiency investments, but also structural shifts in the economy and changes to energy using behavior. Let me start with the investment trends that we have observed. So in contrast to the decrease we expected at the beginning of the crisis, global energy investments, or global energy efficiency investments in particular, actually remained flat in 2020, despite declines in transport energy efficiency investments and thanks to unprecedented growth of buildings energy efficiency investments. However, while stimulus programs in some countries have started to roll out and have had some first effects, most of the increase in the building sector is due to a doubling of the German KfW's energy efficient construction and renovation program. It's also worth noting that the programs were scaled up as a result of measures agreed in the German Climate Action Program in September 2019. So it's rather related to an effort to meet the EU climate targets than stimulus investments in this case. In industry, we've seen lower energy prices, which have lengthened payback periods for key efficiency technologies by 10 to 40%, and therefore slightly reduced industry efficiency investments. In transport, overall car sales dropped with hesitancy in some markets to commit to more efficient purchases and a rising share in SUV sales. However, some of this decrease was offset by strong electric vehicle sales. And for 2021, we expect an increase in investments in efficiency in all these three sectors, driven by higher GDP growth and stimulus investments that will roll out more this year. We'll share with you some more details in our upcoming World Energy Investment Report on that. And next, here you can see that although overall car sales declined, the share of EVs in total sales are now reached nearly 5%. That's due to a 40% growth worldwide and even stronger growth in the European Union. This here on the next slide is an example of new data sources that we've started to look at to get first real-time insights to complement our traditional survey-based energy data. So as you can see here, online shopping searches for major appliances increased during the crisis as people spent more time at home. And actual sales data from major markets also supports these trends. And in terms of efficiency, this rise in sales has positive impacts on the appliance stock as new, more efficient appliances replace older, less efficient appliances driven by technology improvements and minimum energy performance standards. The partial shift to online sales that is also indicated here also underlines the importance of clear labeling of efficient products on online platforms. So now some notable structural changes in energy use. And data from the US, for example, suggests that we've seen an increase in commercial buildings energy intensity as overall energy demand declined less drastically in more energy intensive subsectors such as food sales services or healthcare during the crisis. In the industry sector, energy-intensive industries appear to have been less affected by the pandemic, so that industry energy intensity is likely to have increased in the short term. And we've also looked at behavior changes, and there were some substantial changes into the way how we use energy that I'd like to show you. So this figure here is based on Google data that shows that in most countries, time spent at home increased while people spend less time commuting and in offices and other workplaces. And yeah, as you can see here, this is data that is very easy to update and can provide real-time insights. We've already seen that this likely had likely had effects on appliance purchases, but perhaps unsurprisingly, this also had impacts on how we use appliances. So, for example, smart meter data from the Netherlands showed that washing machines ran more frequently during the week, and that dishwashers were used more both on weekdays and weekends. In general, weekday electricity demand patterns in many countries look more like usual weekend demand patterns that we've observed before the crisis. In the transport sector, we have observed a partial shift from public transport to private modes, with overall mobility levels being lower due to lockdowns and mobility restrictions. And although the use of cars increased in relative terms, there was also a shift to efficient modes such as walking and cycling, which is an opportunity in the long term. So if some of these behaviors were to remain, certain habit changes could have the same effect as taking all cars off the road in the EU in 2030. So, I mean, this is if they were to remain worldwide, so this is not just for the EU, but that's the effect. And notable savings would also come from fewer business-related flights, for example. However, policies will be required to shape our behavior going forward because we're likely to pick up some old habits again after the crisis without those. And based on current estimates, we expect that energy demand will increase by around 5% in 2021, with energy intensity slightly improving, but still remaining well below the levels we need to get on track to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's even further below levels required for a net zero development pathway. Finally, I'd like to share some insights from our analysis of economic stimulus. And the following figures are based on research we did up until October last year, but a much more detailed overview of clean energy stimulus investments worldwide and their impacts on emissions and employment will follow in the coming months. So governments have announced nearly $70 billion in energy efficiency related stimulus worldwide as of October last year, with the largest share of announcements targeting more efficient buildings. And the next generation EU package is likely to even increase these numbers substantially. However, current stimulus plans for some sectors, such as appliances, industry, and transport, have been small compared to what we outlined in the Sustainable Recovery Plan earlier last year. These stimulus investments are also likely to create a substantial number of clean energy and energy efficiency jobs over the coming years, though with large regional differences, and most of the spending likely to happen in the European Union and North America, based on current announcements that we're aware of. Yeah, so thank you very much for your attention. And I think we now should have time for some questions as well.
Thank you very much, Yannick. I think it was very interesting one and nice insights. If anybody would like to ask any questions, first of all, for clarification or remarks you might be having. Okay, I might start with something which struck me. It was very interesting, this concept of the appliances, actually, what we saw, that indeed we have had shifts in the appliances towards more efficient ones. And I would like to ask here, this was somehow combined with the policy measures behind these appliances globally, or we just moved to a new BAU, business as usual? I mean, what's more or less your feeling now from all the overview you have in the market?
So on appliances, we don't have specific data that looks at efficient appliance sales, unfortunately. So this is more of an estimate that the new appliances that have been purchased last year are more efficient because of minimum energy performance standards in key markets. But unfortunately, there's no market data at this point that we've been aware of that really indicates that the higher end has been selected. And also, in terms of the stimulus that we've tracked, there was nothing that indicated specific programs targeting appliances. So we are aware of programs during the global financial crisis a decade ago that supported efficient appliance sales, for example, in Mexico, with a very effective program to replace, for example, old refrigerators with new ones that had to meet a minimum energy performance level. So there are good examples, and we hope that some of these will be picked up while governments continue to design the stimulus programs. But yeah, so far there's nothing specific.
Thank you very much. So it's clear. Then, I mean, there are some hands raised, so we do have some time. Dario Di Santo from FIRE in Italy. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Yannick, for your interesting presentation. We have seen how smart working had an impact on both life and the work of all of us. Did you try to make some scenario about what will happen after the end of the pandemic in this sense? What do you expect? Smart working will continue, and how much? Thank you.
So I don't think there are very specific scenarios looking at that, but in general, what the IEA does is scenario-based work where you don't just assume one future pathway, but different options. And in the stated policy scenarios that is looking at what would happen based on current developments, I think we would expect some rebounds in behavior, but in more sustainable scenario pathways, we would assume greater shifts in behavior change going forward. And it's hard to say how much behavior will rebound in terms of teleworking, in terms of business flights at this point. There are different opinions on, for example, business travel. So I've seen studies saying that maybe up to a third of business travel could be reduced going forward, but other experts in the area have been quite confident that there will be a strong rebound in that sense. So it remains to be seen, and I think we have a range of different assumptions in the scenarios to reflect that. More optimistic assumptions on behavior change in our sustainable development scenario and the net zero pathways.
Thank you very much, Yannick. No, I think it's clear. Okay, then If there is no more question, I suggest we move on to the market part now, starting from Dominique Osso from the Electricité de France, and followed by the FES group from Pascal Guillaume. So this is an important first aspect to see what's happening in the electricity market and the energy efficiency market from some two core players. Dominique, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vasis. So I will share my screen with you. Good morning, everyone. I will share. Yes. Oh, nope. This one. Sorry. I share the wrong screen. So I will move to the other one. Yep. That will be better. Sorry for the inconvenience. Yes. Morning, everyone. So I will speak about the implementation of Article 7 in French, and especially about the French EU scheme. So first, a light overview of the French economic context. In France, we have suffered in last year two lockdowns with different impact on the economy activity. The first was a huge one. It was in March, April. And the second one in fall, it was a lighter one on the economic activity. And for the record, we are currently living the third lockdown in France. So going back to the article, the fulfillment of the Article 7, in France, it's relying on an EU scheme. And mainly the EU eligible measures are implemented in the building sector. More than two-thirds of the EU activity, as you can see here in the figures. So in a large part of my talks, I will speak about the building sector and implementation of energy efficiency actions. So to understand the effect of COVID of the fulfillment, we need to take a look at the building market, and especially what can you say today with available figures. It's that the building sector is suffering from the loss of jobs, but it's very different in subsectors. We can talk about the construction of new building versus the retrofit market. And the retrofit market suffer less than other activities of the building sector, due in particular to public aids. So a large amount of financial incentive was injected in the retrofit market to provide energy efficiency retrofit and so on. So it was the impact of the energy efficiency actions linked to the fulfillment of the Article 7 under the EU scheme suffer less than the overall activity of the building market and the activity. So you can say that in furthermore, we do not observe any impact on the EU price index that remains stable over the last 2 years. So from the viewpoint of the French EU scheme, the COVID impact is not very obvious at the macro level. But in terms of numbers of energy efficiency action implemented inside the EU, what was possible to observe is a decrease of retrofit action during the first lockdown. You can see from March to June, for example, and especially in the first lockdown. The second lockdown was not very observable in the implemented actions months after months. We must notice also that the French EU scheme changes rule over time. So there is also other impacts coming from other changes in the scheme. So it's not so easy to separate the impact of the pandemic on the scheme. And we, in this slide, we present insulation and space heating, efficient space heating system implemented in the residential sector. So the impact is not so obvious. And we must notice also that there is a strong delay between the direct implementation of the action on site and the delivering of the EO certificate, from 6 to 12 months or more, depending on sector. So there is a delay effect of the issuing of EO certificates inside the scheme also, but we don't observe any large impact at the moment. So in conclusion, EO's actions remain largely subsidized. So the impact of the pandemic is, for the time being, remains low. But for the future, the state of affairs remains uncertain. So the impact of the COVID could come later due to different factors. And we must keep in mind that the EU scheme in France is driven by an obligation level to fulfill. And the euro price acts as an adjustment variable. And so the price could increase to fulfill the obligation if the numbers of implemented action decrease. So there is no direct link between the economic activity of the overall building sector or energy efficiency actions and the dedicated aspect of the EU. So it's at the moment it's difficult to observe a large impact of the pandemic on the scheme, but this effect could come later with the increase of the economic crisis or not. So it's difficult to say. So I think this is the end of my talk, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dominique. We will have some time for discussion right after the next intervention. Do we just need have any questions for clarification on the number we saw? Okay. I would just like to ask something, Dominique, for the graph you showed on the EO delivery. That there was a delay. I mean,
yes.
How do you expect, or how could you explain a bit that this has an impact? I mean, the delivery of the EO, does it have to do that with is it linked, let's say, to the financing part of the investments, the delayed delivery of the EO, or it's just about how obligated parties can manipulate the certificates afterwards? I mean, how was directly the connection between the delays of the EO and the effect on the and the effect it's on the market? This perhaps we could explain a bit more.
Oh yes. So the figures that I presented in the graph was about the date of implementation on site of the retrofit works. Then the delay lies with we can say that to fulfill to fill the forms, to ask for certificate from the customers, to ask for financial incentive, to receive the incentive, to fulfill the form, and then to give the form to the utility and obligated parties, and the obligated parties control the forms and so on, the files, and then they will ask for certificates to the public body. And all this process could take 1 year. So that, for example, the decrease of implemented action in April last year could be observed only now due to the delay. So it's a little bit early to say there is no impact, but we can observe a strong impact at the moment. That's why I say I don't know for the future. And what I can say also that the large decrease appears to in 2-3 months only. and there is a lot of inertia inside the scheme. So it could be this EU scheme could be remaining stable because it absorbs the decrease with other sectors, because I present figures only concerning building sector in the residential sector, but not for tertiary or industry that also are part of the EU scheme. But we don't have any figure about that.
No, that's clear. That's clear. Thank you. If anybody would like to ask something, just raise hands. Otherwise, we can wait for the discussion right after the next intervention. Okay. So there's no immediate question. Then we move on to the next presentation from Pascal Guillaume from FES. Pascal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll try to answer some of the questions that were raised, some of the uncertainties through our market perception. So just a second to try to set up. I'm struggling, sorry. Right. Can you see my presentation? Hello?
Yes, Pascal. Now we see your right.
Okay. So, good morning, everybody. My name is Pascal Guillaume. I'm the president of FES. I will very briefly present who FES is, and then I'll move on to the topic of my presentation, which is the impact of COVID on energy efficiency actions and on Article 7.
Pascal, so sorry for the interruption. 1 second. We cannot see your presentation yet. So
you can't? Ah, sorry.
No.
So I'm trying again. Can you see it now?
Yes, now it's okay. Perfect.
Great. So sorry for the bad start. So just a few words about FES. As I said, we are a European trade association covering 12 member states. We represent energy services companies, also known as ESCOs, either directly or through their national trade associations. So for today's presentation, I will rely on the feedback of two of our members, ASSO ESCO from Italy and FEDEN from France. Our members' activities, it's to design, implement and manage energy efficiency solutions, but most importantly, also guarantee over time the savings, meaning the energy improvements on the long term. So it really makes the difference from our point of view. So moving to the French situation and year 2020, from our perspective, we saw really three main phases in 2020. The first one was, as it was said before, the first containment phase that lasted from March to May, which was a very strong containment, and works activities came to a total stop as far as energy improvement actions are concerned. Our activities carried on, but for corrective actions, operational of critical assets or installations in hospitals, in industrial sites, or in the district heatings. So really a complete operational stop, as well as commercial. Meanwhile, and to get the momentum and to keep the momentum, the French authorities granted some flexibilities very positively. The first one was about the delay that was mentioned earlier for submitting applications. This delay, which is limited to 12 months, was pushed back to 18 months. And also some flexibility was given as far as completeness of the paperwork is concerned, to ensure that things will keep on going, if I may say. Other positive thing is that the process was going through a transformation, and this transformation agenda was maintained, and it was focusing in improving making the system more efficient in a number of ways. The first one was to tackle poor quality and fraud, which is fundamental as far as trust in the system is concerned. The second one was rewarding performance. And in that respect, the French system grants bonuses for energy performance contracts, which is recognizing that when there is an energy performance contract and when somebody is guaranteeing that the design savings will be delivered, there is really an added value. Last but not least, the decision was also taken to create some bonuses for the most impacting actions, like, for example, global renovation. So, coming from this moment where almost everything stopped, for example, in the SMEs, almost 90% of them closed shop, we moved to the second phase from June to August, where things were slightly back to normal. It was a ramping up phase, and really things boosted starting in September. And since September, we have seen a very intense operational and commercial activity, which is due to a number of factors. The first one is obviously the catching up of what was delayed during the containment phase. The second one is also the impact of the bonuses that were created early in the year. And last but not least, the fact that the recovery plan was pretty much well aligned with energy efficiency, with a focus on energy renovation, with a call for projects in schools, in public buildings, and also an incentive to a strong push for industry decarbonization, including energy efficiency actions. So, as far as we are concerned, 2020 year will be a strong year in terms of production of certificates and actions. So, despite this freeze for about a couple of months, 2020 year will be a strong year. COVID will not really impact. Our main bottleneck is availability of the workforce. This is really, it has been an ongoing issue for activities for quite some time, and it will remain for the foreseeable future. Last but not least, there is looming an increase in cost and a bit of difficulties in the availability of materials that appeared back end of 2020. So if you look at the profile of request filed, you can see that globally 2020 is in a growing trend with the two dips that mark the containment phase. So what's next? We're entering a fifth period that will last 4 years. Two main messages. The first is that we feel that it's very positive that it's going to be a 4-year period because it will ensure visibility to companies. It's quite important for actors who want to invest and set up organization to be able to address the market demand. And it is also very important for industrial players to have visibility and make sure that when they decide for an investment, they will get the benefit of being awarded these certificates. Second key factor, the target level for the fifth period will be increased by a partial 17%. But as a matter of fact, as it goes together with the reduction of the bonus level, this should more look like increasing the real effective energy savings by something like 30%. So strong push for the next period. Coming to the Italian situation, there are a number of similarities, but for one key issue, which is that the Italian system was already in a difficult path since 2014 for a number of reasons. According to our members, one of them was some instability in the system with changes that had sometimes a retroactive impact, which undermined the confidence and the trust in the system. And the second one was a change of governance, where the system, being previously managed by an independent body, moved to another body, which is still energy oriented, but maybe not as expert as the previous one. So there was a difficulty in the system, and the COVID is probably not a strong factor in the issue. Similarly, as I said, the Italian authorities showed an understanding of what was going on by improving flexibility in the system itself. The reconciliation deadline for obliged parties was extended from May to November. Similarly to what was done in France, also there was a bit of time given to complete some administrative procedures. And there was also an incentive given for high performance cogeneration to get project on the ground, which was to be able to anticipate certificates in the year of commissioning, and also to have visibility on the value of the certificates by being able to claim the value from the previous year. So a number of actions, decisions that showed understanding that we were going through a very specific situation. Again, there was a very positive system that was set up in place, which is called super bonus. This consists in a 110% tax credit. So if you invest in energy efficiency in a project that improve the energy efficiency of the building from at least 2 classes, you get 110% of your capex as a tax credit. So this was aimed at boosting the project for improving energy efficiency in the buildings. Obviously, with such a bonus, these actions are not eligible to certificates granting. Maybe a few comments from our member on how to go further and how to make it even better. First one is, as always, where there is a strong incentive, there may be speculation. So this system imposes for the works to be commissioned and finished by June 2020. It's a short term that fuels speculation, and probably if this system was to be extended for another couple of years, this would make it more efficient. As we always say, there should be the right balance should be stricken between having the right paperwork to show that things were done and done properly, and obtaining the credit, but also facing the fact that it's an administrative burden and it's a cost attached to it. And as in France, recognize the benefit of energy performance contract, which brings security and safety, and ensure that the energy improvements will be observed in terms of real savings on the long run. So as a conclusion, if I was to share what we feel both in Italy and France as key success factors, the first one is alignment of this mechanism of energy certificates with support mechanism. having the right articulation between both and with those systems and policies, like, for example, the tertiary decree in France. Stability is key to get people to invest, and this system needs to be flexible to be able to adapt to the situation, surely, but when changes are decided, there should be enough notice to avoid retroactive impacts on people who have decided to invest, have committed, and might not be awarded the certificate. Striking the right balance, as I said, between controls, documents, and cost. We fully support the fact that poor quality and fraud should be really challenged because it undermines the trust in the system, hence it undermines the system itself. But it has to be a balancing act. And I will finish by insisting on the fact that solutions that guarantee measurable and sustainable savings over the long run, like energy performance contract, should be recognized as they are already, but it should be a measure that is expanded where it's not yet the case, because we all understand that no matter how effective the investment was implemented, if it's not properly managed, then it will not yield the benefits that are expected. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions if there are.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you also, Dominique. Very enlightening both. Any questions you might be having, please raise hands. I will stick to the, until we get any questions, I will, one from Sam Thomas, from RAP. Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Blasis, and thank you, Pascal. That was a really interesting presentation. I just wanted to ask you a question about the bonus in Italy, the tax bonus. You have to increase your EPC rating by two levels, as far as I understand. And I wondered how well you felt that the measurement of that improvement had been done in Italy, and whether there was any link to energy performance contracting, because as you said, that helps to improve the credibility of the measurement of the improvements in the building's performance. And I wondered whether there was any, whether the EPCs, whether the energy performance contracting had been used in the assessment of the improvement in the energy performance certificate of the buildings. Sorry, too many EPCs, but I think you understand the question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. We happen to have one of our members from SOS Scope that should be present. Maybe he'd better placed to address your question. Roberto, if you're here, if you can open your mic.
I can follow up later, maybe if we can share the details.
Yeah, our member should join. He would be better placed. I could more easily answer questions on the French market, but on the Italian market, it's a bit more difficult for me.
I can say something if you need, Sam, meaning that there is no obligation for energy performance contracts to be used under the super bonus. It's something that many association asked for example, FIRE, but presently is not so much used, and we'll see in the future. So the two classes is basically a check on how the energy performance certificate changes, comparing the situation before and after the renovation of the building. That's it.
No, thank you, Dario. So I will just keep one word from what was mentioned from both and Pascal and Dominique about the regulatory framework and the alignment of the financing streams, which seems to be the most important part for the future. So you could just get one.
Maybe if you could open the mic to my member, because he's trying to speak but he couldn't.
Could you
Roberto
just
Olivieri.
the name and I can. Okay.
Roberto Olivieri.
Roberto, yes, please go ahead.
He's representing the ESCOs in Italy.
Yes, Roberto, you can unmute. You can mute. Roberto, you can click the unmute button and speak. If you can click the unmute button. Okay. Okay, so we can do it on a written comment.
Never mind.
All right, no problem. So, thanks a lot for both interventions. Indeed, so if you could just keep one final word from Pascal or Dominique about what policies you would consider in terms of the financing that let's say, that would be the ones that could work best under the post-COVID part.
Okay, now it's working. If you want.
Okay, Roberto, okay, go ahead.
Finally. Okay, now just yes. Hello, good morning to everyone. I'm a member of ASSO-ESCO. Just to answer to your question, I can confirm, as Dario told before, at the moment there are no premium for MPC contract. It will be something that we would like to see in the future for super bonus in Italy.
Okay, clear. So from Pascal and Dominique, what if we could just go one final word from you? What would you consider would be the ideal or most suitable policies or financing streams that could help out the speedy recovery after the COVID on the energy efficiency parts? Just in a bullet.
I'll let if you want to begin.
Yeah, please. Yes, Pascal, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that again, it was in my conclusion. If you support financing, you need to be sure that the savings will be there. So it has been demonstrated that energy performance contracts have the benefit of guaranteeing that the payback will be supported by effective savings. So I would suggest that recognizing the fact that there is a counterpart that will guarantee the savings is securing any investment and any public support. So I think it should be recognized in the way these finance are awarded.
Clear. Yeah. And from Dominique, from the supplier's perspective, which policy or type of financing would you consider now, having seen what has happened during the last year, that would be the ideal one to help overcome the crisis faced?
Yes. Personally, I don't think there is one ideal financial incentive, but it's complementary financial incentives. For example, for EU, you can have for energy efficiency measures 2 different incentives. One coming from the EU scheme, let's say paid by the obligated parties or by the scheme. In fact, after its cost recovery on the customer bills. And the second one is the new scheme from public bodies. The tax credit is now called My Primanov. It's a bonus for retrofit. And you can, for a customer and household, propose the two incentives, and it supports a large share of upfront cost. So I think it's a good example, but there's nothing new about that.
No, that's important. Still, it's important to always remember for that. Okay, thank you both very much, and then we move on to the next part from Nicola Donati, starting from NLX. Sam, if there is any clarification or a short question, I saw your hand raised.
No, it's all right. I had a bigger question, so let's move on and maybe we can deal
with
it.
All right, we have time for the discussion afterwards. Okay, so starting from Nicola Donati from NLX. Nicola, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. I'll try to briefly give you a perspective of somehow an industrial player. Just a couple of minutes on who we are. Actually, NLX is a company born 3 years ago as a spin-off of NL Group. We're a service company actually looking after the opportunity to serve our customer into the, becoming more sustainable and efficient in the use of energy. I just stop here because actually what we do is trying to drive our customers from B2C, B2B, B2G through different services into 3 main pillars, which are the digitalization, decarbonization, and electrification. Apart from these are that could be perceived as slogan, I'd like to give, from our observatory what we experienced in the last year during the pandemic, and I do agree with all the colleagues said. So in the industrial segment, we already experienced that in Q3 there is a recovery. We can even look at how the commodity prices recovered over time. We are in a strange situation whether in some specific industrial segment we experience a short of stock, and I think one of the lessons learned is how we can extract much more value from the data, also in the energy efficiency space. It's true that the drop of electricity demand in the end didn't support any structural implementation. On the other way around, I do see that every time we start a conversation with customers, it's really sustainability related. And this is, it's not that easy out to say. If I look back at 3 years ago, both at large corporation, that wasn't so straightforward. So one important thing, you mentioned the fact that we do need some instruments in place to track, baselines, how EPC works, and I totally agree with that. And an easy way to do that is to implement and support also the rollout of application that exist in the marketplace to get those tracked, and then support EPC or financing mechanism. Financing, I think it's another key point that emerged in 2020. It's not new, as Sam said. We are looking towards opportunity to create a kind of stewardship model, bringing capex out of the balance sheet of customers, and clearly it's a way to get those financed and support customers that are maybe less inclined to go for spot sale model to purchase heat pumps or any kind of application for energy efficiency. And we do see a good traction in the marketplace where basically you can support them in buyback assets or support them in the revamping. Another interesting thing to increase the IRR of energy efficiency application is also the opportunity that other revenue streams would allow to through a bundle. So if you think, for example, to capacity market or energy market access, especially for the industrial segment, and where a flexibility mechanism or capacity market are in place, I'm thinking to the UK, Central Europe, Southern Europe, or North America as well. The opportunity to bundle, solution like monetization of flexibility assets and modulation of load, together with the application of, again, I take as heat pump as an easy example, in the end support the IRR of this project. In addition to the public incentives, watt certificates, energy certificates application. Our feeling is that the customer are much more looking for this kind of new solution. Again, tool that help them to become aware of how they consume, both in the industrial segment, but especially if you look at the commercial. In the commercial, the level of awareness of energy consumption is a bit lower, and it's been a segment that particularly affected this by the pandemic last year, and it's slowly recovering. I heard about the tax credit implemented in Italy. It's a similar measure that some also federal states in the North America are implementing for energy efficiency application, or if you look at energy storage, for example, the mechanism is not that different. We do see a good traction in Italy of the eco bonus, of the tax credit mechanism. I totally agree with the fact that it seems to be a short-term measure that create a kind of speculation in the marketplace, and the fact that the stocks, or specifically on the supply side, the prices are definitely increasing. So from a regulatory standpoint, we also look for a much more a mid-long-term approach, a mid-term vision to this kind of measure. Moving back to the sustainability stuff, also the colleagues from IEA mentioned the EV. EV, it's interesting because despite automotive software clearly in 2020, the growth of EV adoption is, I think it's a confirmed trend, and we do see a penetration. We look from an infrastructural standpoint, being provider of electric infrastructure. Every time you talk with corporation, apart from the public application, and you start talking about scope 1, scope 2, optimization of energy sourcing, then you move to scope 3 and mobility. It's the feeling of converting fleet, for example, of corporation is really perceived, and we do see a lot of demand in the marketplace. So what's the connection here with energy efficiency? Energy efficiency is it's a mix of different components of application. You have hardware component or manufacturer in the industrial space, optimization of processes, even though it's not necessarily the first thing that companies are inclined to work on. It's the renovation of the real estate or commercial space, but it's also e-fleet electrification. If we look at the number of charging points installed in the last year, it's 10, 15 times growth year on year, and we are foreseeing a 23, 24. This is our plan. Probably the market might be even faster. And down to the B2C, which is typically much more trickier because we are all end user and we are pretty sensitive to the price. But we see that with new application for energy consumption, customers start to change a bit their mind with new PV different application, not only on rooftop but with balcony application, for example. So the perspective I'd like to give is that despite COVID obviously has negatively affected the marketplace, especially in some part of the world, EU recovery is lower than North America, also given to the amount of capital injected in North America. Or if we look at LATAM, the recovery is very, very slow. But we are positive about the future. And again, our capability to introduce also mechanism where we turn and we provide an objective visibility, which is data driven, basically, of how EPC contract are performing, how a financier, could be the bank, could be a private, could be a fund, a joint venture, as we do, provide visibility on return on investment, would help customers also in accelerating the transition. So add very interesting numbers from EA, but that's been already shared. So I stop here, maybe to leave some time for your questions.
Thank you, Nicola. Any clarification for questions, as we'll have the time to discuss in the group first on what we've seen? I think it was clear. It was interesting. Okay. All right. So, Nicola, thank you. We move on to Roland Kladrusenko from Eurima, with from insulation manufacturers, and then from the UIP, and then we're going to have a round of discussion. Great. Yeah. Roland, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vlasis. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you okay, yeah.
Great. I'm just putting a couple of slides on the screen as well. Hope you can see those in a moment. Okay, you should have a big green EUREMA. Okay, so as Vlas has mentioned, EUREMA, at EUREMA we represent Europe's mineral wool insulation manufacturers. As an association, we focus on energy efficiency policy, on health and safety issues, on standardization. The one thing I just want to note that we don't do is systematically collect industry data from our members. So in that sense, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage today. But of course, we have discussed the impact of COVID with the membership, and there are a few broad themes, some big takeaways that are common across the different companies and the different European markets that we work in. So, so happy to be here today and happy to share some of those takeaways with you. Now, the first thing to note is that our industry, you'll see, largely mirrors the performance of the broader EU construction sector, which, as you all know, experienced a very sudden dip at the outset of the pandemic. Following this sharp pullback, construction activity recovered in the second half of the year. As some of the previous speakers, as Pascal from FES explained earlier, this was happening at a time when countries were emerging from lockdown, governments were shifting towards recovery spending, which of course meant significant stimulus, some of which went towards renovation. Now, another important factor was definitely the commitments from national governments across Europe to prioritize keeping construction sites open. And in a lot of countries, this was at least in part justified on the basis of the multiple economic, climate, health benefits that come from renovation especially. And so all this, the sudden drop in Q2 and then the stabilization in Q3, Q4, all of this added up to a year for us where overall our industry shrank, but only shrank in the low single digits. This means that we slightly outperformed the broader construction sector, but the overall trend that you see in the charts I've put on the slide there, that is still very much reflective of our industry, of our subsection of the construction sector. So it was by no means a great year for us, but given the circumstances and the way some other industries got decimated during the pandemic, we have to consider ourselves quite fortunate that all we're dealing with is a single digit kind of drop in activity there. Now, of course, the picture I've painted is by no means uniform across the EU. Some markets perform better than others, depending on the severity of the restrictions, but also the financial constraints they're facing. One of the previous speakers already pointed out how big I think the Yannick from IEA talked about the significance of the German climate bill and implementing that, but we also know that the differences between stimulus in that country and, for example, some of the others in Central Eastern Europe or Southern Europe are, of course, huge, and that played a part. It was also not a uniform picture in terms of construction versus renovation. As mentioned, renovation seems to have been much less impacted than new build. You might ask why that is the case. I think Dominique from EDF already covered this very nicely. I would just agree with him that policy played a big part in this. This was very evident in Southern Europe, where the market quickly bounced back in the second half of the year once there were these strong signals that government support for renovation was on its way or already there. So that's where we're coming from. What's left to discuss is where we're going next. We think COVID will undoubtedly continue to leave a mark throughout 2021, but there are also some reasons for being optimistic. There's an activities backlog, especially in residential buildings, that's quite significant. There is the underlying pre-pandemic trend in construction activity that was strong, if we can get back to that. And we hope the initial impact of policy measures, of the renovation wave, of the Green Deal, will create a certain confidence and urgency for investment in renovation. So those are some good reasons to be optimistic. Now, the only thing we would caution on, and what we consider a potential challenge for us in 2021 and beyond, is indeed product and labor availability. So I would echo the colleagues from FES and also I think NLX on this. This was a question we were always going to have to face, that if we have such a sudden rebound in activity, bottlenecks with labor and products to some degree are inevitable, but to what degree, that is still an open question for us. So that's our industry and where we stand. But the name of this session is on the end user, so I'll use the remaining time I have to talk about that. Specifically, I'd like to take up the perspective of the household end user rather than the commercial or industrial one. I think the ENSMOV survey has already done a good job of reflecting on the commercial sector, so perhaps residential is where I can add a bit more to the discussion. And if we start that with the most fundamental question I've put up here, which is, what have end users been doing during the pandemic? What have households been spending money on? We know households have been very interested in upgrading their homes for all kinds of obvious reasons. Sales of home appliances, of electronics, furniture, DIY equipment have all been very strong in Europe and also more globally. At the same time, we know the EU household savings rate remains near record highs. I think recently economists at Allianz made some estimates on what this could mean for the EU economy, saying that excess savings could result in about 170 billion or equal to 1.5% of EU GDP spent this year. So we're at an interesting conjunction in terms of renovation. We have this high pent-up demand, we have strong consumer appetite for home improvement, and all of this, of course, bodes well for the renovation wave, at least on the surface of it. But the challenge is then, how do we nudge consumers towards deploying those savings beyond furniture and appliances and a bit of DIY here and there, and towards deep renovation of the building envelope and beyond? I think in the survey you noted that some stakeholders feel that energy efficiency improvements are not an inevitable consequence of COVID-19 because consumers might not make lifelong savings based on kind of short to medium term events as we're going through now. And I think this point is spot on. Without the right policy framework, I think this would indeed be the case. So how does EED Article 7 fit into all this? Many of you will be following the debates taking place on the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. For us at EUREMA, this is a huge opportunity to establish the kind of ambitious regulatory measures needed to drive demand for renovation. So minimum energy performance standards, or MEPS, for existing buildings is one of those examples that we're pushing for. But we also recognize that these kind of ambitious requirements like MEPS cannot succeed without a strong supporting framework on financing, on workforce training, administrative, technical assistance, etc., etc. And this is where EED Article 7 comes in as one of the most important tools we have for developing that supporting framework. So the hopeful scenario would be that by combining regulatory certainty that we can create through the EPBD with a more ambitious energy savings obligation, we then signal to the consumer that building renovation is the right place to be channeling those excess savings. And the last thing I'd like to leave you with is just a few concrete examples of where EED Article 7 can really make a difference. There are these three core themes we keep coming back to whenever discussing how to implement the renovation wave. The first is we talk about raising the level of ambition in the legislation. So this is where we talk about a raised energy efficiency target, maybe binding national targets, MEPS, ETS, effort sharing. So here, I think Article 7 clearly has a huge role. I think I can't think of a single other measure as powerful for driving energy efficiency than a more ambitious energy savings obligation. The second thing we always talk about is strengthening the supporting framework. So this is what I touched on earlier with public finance, with workforce training, with technical assistance. And here, again, Article 7 has a big role because Article 7 provisions can determine what kind of energy saving measures are prioritized. Currently, for us, the rules around that are a little too flexible. For example, we know that a great many member states meet part of their ESO obligation with energy taxation measures, which a number of studies have shown to be difficult to monitor and often impossible to verify. So for us, Article 7 should really be about promoting verifiable, long-lasting measures like building renovation. And the last point worth noting is that as we revise so many different pieces of legislation all at once, there is clearly a need to do this in a coherent and consistent way. And this is where long-term renovation strategies come in, NECPs come in. And here again, Article 7 is very relevant. We particularly see a lot of room for synergies between the long-term renovation strategies and Article 7. So ideally, what we would want to see in the long-term renovation strategies is that a member state lays out the objectives for deep renovation, specifying indicative targets for what percentage of the building stock that member state intends to reach in terms of deep renovation per annum. And then in that same document, outline how Article 7 measures are going to help building owners achieve those targets. So that's how we view all this going forward. I'll stop there, but happy to discuss any of this further if anyone has questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roland. Yes, indeed, I'm receiving also some policy type of questions which reflect all of you. I would perhaps, if there is just a clarification question at this stage, and then we'll drop the questions for a more policy debate in a bit. So if there is just a clarification questions from the partners here. Okay, then we move on to the other two interventions, and then let's hold a 5-10 minutes round table of discussion since we get quite some interesting questions for all of you. We go to the UIP from Maria Francisca Figueira from the International Union of Property Owners. So it's one of the key, of course, stakeholders from what we've heard so far in the debate on the Landlord Association. So Maria, you have carried out a survey which is interesting for all of us. The floor is yours.
Hello, Vlasis, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. So my name is Maria. I work for UIPI, the International Union of Property Owners. And here today I come, as Vlasis correctly said, and share with you some insights that we gathered through a survey that we conducted early in the first quarter of the year. Just to give you a bit of information about UIPI, if I managed to move the slide. Yes. So UIPI is a pan-European nonprofit association. We currently have 31 national member associations in 28 different countries, and we represent owner-occupiers, co-owners, and landlords, either individual or large. And these are 2 million owner-occupier in Europe and 4 million landlords, and 90% of which are in the residential sector. So what I will bring here today are the results, some of the results of a survey that we conducted, as I said, that allowed us to have a bit more quantitative data about our members and the sector we represent. And so what we wanted to achieve was to understand the property owner's readiness and capacity to renovate. So I won't be, we don't have means of verifying whether the results we gather are the results of specific policies, but I think this can be interesting in the sense that if we understand where end users stand, policies can be better adapted. So we wanted to understand the effect of COVID in renovation plans and understand what these plans were. And so just quickly, we obtained over 10,000 responses, which gives us a representative sample at EU level, and we did get some representative samples at national levels in 7 countries. One of the main things that this survey showed is that property owners do consider it's beneficial to retrofit or renovate their houses and their properties in general, and that there are multi-benefits to take from this, and that they consider that they can achieve several goals at the same time. So they can combine increasing rental property value and savings with health benefits and environmental benefits as well. There were many were planning to do renovations before the pandemic. And as you can see from this graph that shows different plans according to country, most the countries that actually are in need of most renovation are also the countries that maybe need to work on insulation more. And this is interesting in one of the following slides, because we'll see that there might be a connection with temperature comfort in the houses. I think this can be linked with what was previously said by other speakers, that there is an increased attention to how we spend time in our homes. And as you can see from the type of renovation plans, isolation is the main focus. Even replacing windows and thermal insulations are linked to this. As to how COVID impacted these renovation plans, for those that declared that there was an impact, the most significant one was a postponing of plans, followed by changes in budget. As you can see here, before COVID-19, budgets were higher, and after, most respondents can attribute to their renovations less than 5,000 euros. And this has an impact, probably will have an impact, although we cannot assess directly from the results of the survey, on the quality of the renovation and how deep the renovation is, and consequently the energy savings that might come from it. As to understand why property owners would not renovate, well, 28% estimate they don't need to renovate. And a large share want to, but don't have the funds to do it. So we asked property owners what would be the incentives they would like to have set in place to help them renovate. And here it's clear that, well, subsidies and grants are the most selected option, but then also if we look at everything that is related to tax, either reductions or deductions, have a lot of percentage as well. So combining property tax deduction, VAT deduction, and income tax credits and deductions, we have a very large share of property owners that consider this could help them put their plans into motion. So if we think a bit of how COVID impacted, and given these results, possible implementations, the Article 7 implementation, well, first of all, we need to consider COVID as a delaying factor. And as I said, that the renovation budgets were affected. So the support schemes that follow COVID and made for the recovery need to take this into account if they are to be successful. So there are the most, I believe that what this implies that member states should give priority to grant some subsidies and tax deductions, although not only. Some examples of this that are working, and I won't explain them because also they were already mentioned here by previous speakers, but energy certificates are a good example of popular schemes. And then grants such as Ma Prime Rénov in France, in which you obtain a grant if you manage to prove that you have obtained certain savings, or the super bonus that was already mentioned by Pascal earlier in Italy, that gives you a tax payback higher than the original investment, are very popular schemes. There are many others. And then we also think that to address other barriers, this type of schemes need to be complemented with other initiatives, such as one-stop shops, which from all the feedback that we have been given are a very good way to help property owners renovate by providing centralized information and support that helps to complexify, establishing trust from proximity relations. And one important thing is also for less tech savvy, let's say, parts of the population that are still important, especially when we think about property owners. and they are linked to age groups, having proximity support is very important to help property owners understand what are their options, what are the benefits of it, and have let's say support along all the phases of renovation. I know that here today I focused a bit on renovation, but this is what, and this is not the only way of property owners to achieve energy savings. We don't have data about behavioral change, so this is why I focused a bit on renovation today, because this is what I could inform you a bit more in a quantitative with quantitative data, but of course there are other ways, and as from what the feedback that we have been receiving orally from our members, yes, there is, as was mentioned before, a bigger interest in improving the quality of households, especially for owner occupiers. And so to conclude a bit today, I think that the main takes from the survey and from my presentation is that COVID has been is a major slowing down factor for deep renovation, and that there is an expected decrease of investment. But Article 7 of the EED can really help creating supporting frames, so that can play an important role in overcoming the barriers. And that, yes, we member states, if they are to consider what end users are looking for, should focus on grants, subsidies, and tax deductions. And this is it for today from my side. Thank you.
Excellent, Maria. Thank you very much for the intervention. And it's very clear actually what the property owners want in the end, and what how the whole thing has been affected. The last presentation, which I would like now my colleague Arnold here from EBN AMRO to start, is has to do with the last part of the puzzle, which is actually one of the most important ones in the end of the day. It's how the financing world sees the overall effect of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 energy efficiency, and how the financing world can help out overcome all the problems we have faced so far. I mean, we see that the market has responded to some degree positively, I would say, from what we have heard, at least from the energy efficiency market. There is still interest and the perspectives are high, but without the financing, you know, things will be always stable. So here I invite as a final speaker Arnold Mulder from ABN AMRO. ABN AMRO is one of the key leading institutes, financing institutes, and very active over the last years in sustainable financing and sustainable energy. So Arnold, the floor is yours. I think most people would like to hear actually what the financing can do, or how financing can work now. Thank you.
Thanks, Vlasic, for the introduction. It was quite a rough year, I think, and we're not out of the woods yet to immediately answer that question, especially regarding the availability of working capital for a lot of companies. It depends a lot on the sector you're looking at, but some sectors are worse off than others. But some companies have really been taken out the available working capital to them, and maybe not used it, applied it for traditional purposes. So they may run into issues later on. But I think that the overall sentiment is highly positive still from our point. I'm trying to share my maybe this works. My slides. I hope that works. The overall sentiment on efficiency improvements and the energy transition in general is highly positive. As a bank, we bet heavily on energy transition and sustainability. One of the things we aim for is to have an average a label on our real estate and housing portfolio an average label A by 2030. So that's quite ambitious already. We offer a lot of, and are about to announce further discounts for sustainable buildings and investments on the rate that we offer. We also provide more lenient conditions on more sustainable investments, and we're quite active in building various propositions. I also heard energy as a service concepts being mentioned earlier, which is quite challenging, to be honest, to make that work. Not from a technical point of view, but to find a solid financial structure for it to work long term. But in general, also to give you a broad view why the overall sentiment from banks is positive. A presentation on COVID-19 and the impact. One slide I often show is this status dashboard from the IEA, which I slightly adapted on this slide. Probably a lot of you know this slide with a traffic light system showing the development stage of a lot of technologies, and this is also often making me quite sad. Not anymore, because I'm used to this slide, but a lot of traffic lights are on orange or on red, and only 3 lightning data centers and electric vehicles are marked as green. So we still have a lot of work ahead of us, energy efficiency being part of a lot of these innovations on this slide. We're not on track, so we have to speed up. And are we on track to speed up, and how is COVID impacting that? Well, I'm borrowing that traffic light system today a little bit and looking at, I think, the 4 key drivers for acceleration of energy efficiency improvement and the energy transition in general, and thereby also because the extent to which the transition becomes mature also depends the extent to which it is financeable. So through the lens of the government, through the lens of technology, through the lens of markets, through the lens of consumers and companies, I'd like to use the traffic light system with some background, and I'll focus mostly on the consumers and companies because, well, those are our clients, and we did quite some research together with the branch organization, the NVDA, the Dutch Association for Sustainable Energy, the branch organization for this sector. We did some studies. We complemented it with other data from the bank, which I'd like to show you. First of all, on the government end, I think COVID has not changed. The governments have not changed course. If at all, it has accelerated the path we're on with green recovery funding, stricter climate target being announced lately, and the Green Deal, of course, headed by Frans Timmermans, and then on the Dutch end at least, but I assume similar developments in other European countries that had the climate treaty, Klimaatakkoord, as it's called. And you really see and feel we're waiting for the new government being installed, but it's only gaining traction. And regulatory development is, of course, the most important driver. Then on the technology end, this is just an illustrative picture of the development of solar panel installations in terms of installed capacity and price. It's a long time frame we're looking at. That's why I show this picture, to remind about the time frame that technological development takes. It's not about 1 or 2 years. It's really about decades to make technological development and doubling of installed capacity to make it happen. So also from that perspective, and with the backing of regulators, I don't see again that second very important pillar of speed of energy efficiency and energy transition creating a lot of problems. On the markets perspective, well, you see a shock and recovery, and basically that's, I also saw it in various other graphs today. Oil prices, CO2 prices reaching record highs. I made this is just a side note, I made a prediction, a forecast on the CO2 price as part of my PC research in 2012, and it exactly the median of that forecast exactly fits this increase of the price. So I'm very happy about it, but also happy from a transition point of view. Oil price is also going up again, luckily, because that also is of course an important driver. You see at least that markets have already gone beyond pandemic levels and the pandemic era, you could almost say. They're looking further ahead. Again, fundamentals pointing in the right direction. From the consumers and companies' point of view, it's a mixed bag. This is from an inquiry we did under all companies in the sector for sustainable energy. So a lot of installers there, but OEM companies, the entire sector. And you see that in March, that expectations, 48% of companies expected revenues to drop by more than 20%, and that quickly dropped to 11% by November. And we recently again checked for this, and there is the trend continues. So it was especially a short-term shock, and then quick recovery. And we see already in November, we saw that 66% of the companies have equal or increasing revenues compared to pre-corona levels. Then what were the key bottlenecks that were identified? Well, at the beginning in March, ongoing work and projects were impossible to continue, and there was insufficient personnel due to sickness. So that's very operational hurdles came into play. Then around May, we saw peak in problems regarding new projects in the pipeline and dropout of demand. So really the demand shock came in 2-3 months after, but that also went away quite quickly. So again, recent survey confirming this image. What is a structural problem in order to be able to speed up, in order to be able to complete a lot of projects, is the vacancies. I see a spelling error. Vacancies outstanding. So here you see everything being indexed to the 1st of February, the amount of vacancies outstanding in the sector. Again, a dip and then a recovery, and we're at this moment already almost returning to pre-corona levels. So a lot of demand and vacancies outstanding. And the issue there is, or a key issue is that a lot of these vacancies, and this graph runs from February to September, a lot of these vacancies are hard to fill. So vacancies of mechanics of electrical panels, or installation mechanics, or mechanic for air conditioning, they are 45% of them were hard to fill. Well, that percentage dropped a bit because the overall outstanding vacancies also dropped, and there was less scarcity in the market. But we really see this as the key issue, key problem with to speed up in the years ahead. So really a labor constraint, more so than a pandemic constraint or whatever. This constraint was a bit relieved during the COVID pandemic, but will fully come back into play in the next few years. And I also saw similar statistics here in the previous presentations, but on the consumer end, there's a higher willingness to spend more on. Sorry, you should read this differently. We did this poll in April and in November, so shortly after the start of the pandemic and half a year later. And this is the percentage of consumers that are willing to spend more or much more on either of these categories. So in April, 28% of the consumers were willing to spend more on house interior. Half a year later, that increased to 34%. And house insulation and energy, 11% were willing to spend or more or much more in April, and in November that increased to 18%. So also, yes, there is an increased willingness to improve your house and do those investments, but also during the pandemic that willingness increased. And we especially see an increase in willingness under those consumers that saw their income, their net available income increase. So of course, that was not due to increase in income, but through lack of spending. So they had more free cash flow, so to say. And for those consumers, the percentage is even much higher, higher willingness to spend on that. So in conclusion, the most important drivers for energy efficiency improvement and the energy transition in general are of a structural nature on which COVID has a limited impact. Market recovery from the initial shock was relatively quick. Governments are only increasing pressure and providing additional funding. Revenue of companies in the sector for sustainable energy have recovered relatively quickly. We also see a lot of companies with just immense pipelines of projects and a lot of highly competitive deals. So a lot of appetite still from banks to finance. Consumers have become more willing and aware of potential. What are the key obstacles then from our perspective? Well, do companies still have the financial resources and means to invest? And did they spend their working capital in the right order, so to say? Or was there some panic spend there? Is there sufficiently technically skilled labor to accelerate? Because to the extent that we have dropped the pace a bit over the past year, you'll have to make up for that later. You have to accelerate. You have to do more with less time and less people probably. And this is really the key bottleneck to speed. And then finally, this final bullet I added also based on the conversations earlier. Energy as a service concepts remain very hard to scale and finance, and that's not particularly related to any technical issue whatsoever. If there are any questions, I hope there's still some time, and otherwise I think I ran a bit over time. So.
No, it was very interesting. No, thank you very much. Actually, as we can see from the graphs you showed and the studies you carried out with the consumers, it's really interesting to see that the Netherlands is taking this energy transition concept quite seriously, and the consumers are, and the end users at least, are getting into this whole idea that they need to invest and they need to carry out actions to invest in energy saving and home insulation. Perhaps this also has to do with the regulatory framework in the Netherlands, which is, you're one of the model countries moving away from natural gas and fossil fuels and all that over the coming years. And this concept seems to have passed to the consumers that they are willing to invest on that. That's
I think the Belgians mock the Dutch that we are always sitting on our money and not willing to spend. And I think sitting at home, working from home, we saw our energy bill increase and noticed how badly insulated the house was. So I'm not sure if it's energy transition related or,
No, could be, yeah. Good point. Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot. So I think now we have seen also the financial aspect and another point of view, which is very important to bridge, let's say, all the policies and the implementation of the actual work. I have received some questions, and I will just show my screen. Just try to group them a bit. Yeah. So from the speakers, please, whoever would like to discuss them. The first one is, if we consider that indeed we have had some energy efficiency policies running during the COVID pandemic, which have helped, and as we saw some nice examples. And one of the questions is that whether we consider that these policies under the COVID will be able both to recover what we lost in the past months and to rise the market capacity in the next year. So far they have been working okay and okay-ish in a way. We've seen that there was some response. Are they substantial and are they enough to recover and also rise? The second question is if the third-party financing. So I think this goes more to Arnold, to the banking side. So if this banking and financing can bridge the gap with the renovation wave, we've seen that there is a big demand, there is quite an interest, but still there is quite a lot of financing required to achieve the 1% and beyond that. And if the financing can act hand in hand with the demand side and energy services. Yeah, I think this question mainly refers to whether the clarity. So if let's say the investment on the energy efficiency from the financing world, if there is doubt, is coming only from the clarity and certainty for energy savings, or there are the other parameters, as Arnold mentioned, for the the capacity that we can have in employment and all these parts. Then, so if it's just about certainty, or is other parameters that influence the decision for financing or investing on energy efficiency from the financing world. And then, if there is a risk that we will witness a short-lived rebound, and then come back to the business as usual, especially with the over-costly policies, the more traditional policies that have generated quite a lot of costs, and sometimes the effects are to be debated. And the last question I have is if we think that the pandemic will help in changing lifestyles and businesses, accelerating the push towards sustainability that has characterized some market leaders in the last decade. So, I mean, these are four questions that I've received now. Who would like to start from the speakers? Primarily. And Sam, also I see a hand raised. Let's add also yours question here. Sam, go ahead.
Thanks, Blasis. My question really was for some of the earlier speakers around whether they think that EEOs are a good instrument to deliver the kind of deep renovations that we're expecting to see with the renovation wave.
Okay. All right, who would like to start from the speakers? I think from the financing part, Arnold, since you were the last presenter.
Yeah. I think the funny thing is, well, let's look at consumers first. They typically have plenty of financing options available, but simply do not want to lend for renovation or for these home improvements. So they prefer to do it out of savings. Anything you do only out of savings will cost more time. So there is no lack of financial instruments or financial capacity to lend from the bank's perspective. So it's more of an maybe a psychological or other blockades there that prevent people from using those instruments that are available. For a lot of companies I mean, on the building codes are doing their thing, label requirements are doing that thing, that they're moving slowly in the right direction. But for companies that really have to change their production processes, I think a lot of technical and policy hurdles are still in place. And we have to tackle them ASAP, because if we have to do everything again in the last 5 to 10 years before a deadline, then you'll run into this big constraint that is the lack of technically skilled labor that can actually execute all these renovations and improvements and adjustments in time. So that's key, I think.
Yeah, that's clear. Thanks for that. Then let's go to the policies aspect, whether the existing, or let's say these new policies that were introduced during the COVID can deliver what we lost and rise also the market capacity for energy efficiency in the next years. Projections, for instance, or what we see from the market, perhaps from the AIA people, or from FES, Pascal, or from Eurima.
Sorry, could you repeat, please?
Yes, the question I'm referring to the second question. I hope you can see my screen with the slides.
Yeah.
Yeah, is whether we consider that all these new policies that were introduced during the COVID period, like these ones that were presented also from Italy and France, etc., are able to recover, in essence, what we lost, and also can continue to rise the energy efficiency market capacity in the next year. So whether we have seen that these short-term policies that were introduced, like these tax rebates and all that, could somehow trigger the market beyond that.
It's a $1 million question. It certainly heads in the right direction, because at the end of the day, the way it's built, at least when we look at the French, but also I think the Italian example, is that recovery plan was articulated with other measures so that the impact is an addition of measures. So it heads in the right direction. And looking at what I said, which is the trend of the energy savings certificates in France, it looks like really the action is taking place. So the only maybe weakness I would see in this system is that it very much focuses on investment. But as I mentioned earlier, really investment will deliver, renovation will deliver as long as the asset is properly maintained and operated. Well, you know, the UK Energy Research Centre estimates that up to 30% of the targeted improvements can disappear due to the rebound effect. So unless you manage demand, unless you operate assets in an optimized way, some of the savings will never be there. So between the expected and design savings and the real savings, there is a potential gap, and this is the one we should carefully look at.
Clear, yes, clear, thank you. Hand from Roland, from Eurima.
Yeah, so whilst you're on this first question, so the question has two parts, right? The first one is kind of recover what we've lost. I'm not sure I can answer that. Maybe is what I'll say. But the second part is, you know, is this enough? So are these COVID stimulated measures, national policies enough to drive the energy efficiency market for years to come? And I think on that one, it has to be a clear no. And it has to be a no because of what some of the other speakers mentioned, which is really the short-term nature of a lot of them. So for us, a lot of these measures are to be applauded for and are certainly serving a purpose, but ultimately will not achieve the kind of rate of deep renovation that we need unless they are accompanied with more longer-term regulatory measures. You know, so this is why, as part of the work on minimum energy performance standards for existing buildings, what is really important for us is that MEPs are introduced together with a long-term regulatory framework, so that you, as a citizen, as a company, know that you need to reach this class by 2030, this class by 2040, and it's clear in law that by 2050 we need an NZEB building stock. And so that kind of long-term perspective also means that you, as a building owner, can use these more short-term schemes properly without a lock-in effect. Because otherwise, we're going to have this whole conversation again in a decade if we have short-term schemes that lead to renovation, but not deep renovation. And it's also not fair for the building owner to not give them that long-term perspective. Thank you.
You're muted, Marcus.
If I may add something, just one thing about the energy performance certificates, which is quite a very good system, as long as somewhere we make sure that we challenge it with real energy consumptions. Again, it's always the same story about design figures and the real energy consumption. And some of it comes from demand management, because with the same asset, with the same building, consumption will be different depending on the demand.
Yeah, yes, this is clear. And then as we run out of time, I will take then the last question from Sam. If the energy efficiency obligations then are significant to, yeah, in a way, it was not mentioned like that, but if they are significant to deliver the renovation wave. So I would put it in a different way. Could they indeed stimulate the energy efficiency market to reach the 1% and beyond in the renovation? And could they also stimulate the financing required? Let's hear, from the people who are into this energy efficiency obligation world here. And yeah, even from Dominique from EDF or...
Yes, it's Dominique from EDF. I can give you a short answer about that. In itself, EOs are not enough to deliver, okay, so the renovation wave linked to deep renovation, strong renovation, because in itself, an EO scheme, as it's designed in France, it's based on energy efficiency actions and competition between actions, how they are rewarded by certificates. However, and the impact of EPC is important to increase the deep renovation. I agree with the former intervention. Also, there is an important movement inside the French EO, because we have inside the scheme we have additional bonuses, but these bonuses will move from only one actions to deep renovation. So the EO can increase the deep renovation, but not alone. But we are moving to reach these targets inside the scheme. But it will be not sufficient in itself. We need more additional policies like EPC or other grants to increase deep renovation. But EOs can only be a part of it, but not the solution.
Very clear. And I hope this also replies a bit to the survey from Maria from UIP, indeed about the Article 7 and the policies, indeed that the EOs can indeed act for to some extent, but more financing policies should be in place. This goes a bit to the graph you demonstrated.
Yes, and just to add something, Placis, because
yes,
one of the first comments here today is that the money is available and that banks have the money to lend. But as for the incentives requested, actually loans were the least popular ones. So yes, property owners do not want to constrain debt. So other forms of support, financing support schemes should be set in place. Yes, just a comment on that.
Yeah, that's clear. That's clear. Okay, so as we are running out of time now, as I think we've completed, thank you very much for all the participation and the keynote speakers and also the audience for participating. I hope you found it interesting. There is a lot of information, a lot of presentations. We're fully aware of that, but that was the intention this time, to provide a holistic view from various market angles to see what exactly has happened. You will all receive a short document highlighting the main points of what we've heard today, and also, of course, the recordings and the presentations. Thank you very much. And
Vlasis,
yes?
I'm sorry, can we just do a short announcement of the workshop next week for ENSMOV?
Yes, of course.
Just a short info, we will have a workshop on setting up and modifying MRV schemes in countries such as Austria, Croatia, and Greece. This will be an ENSMOV workshop next week on the 19th of May, Wednesday, 10 a.m. And we're going to send the invitation with the agenda and the registration link very soon. And we hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you, Novak. Okay. So for the COVID-19, I think we've heard quite positive messages. Indeed, what we've seen, hopefully, of course, has passed on in terms of health and all that. But nevertheless, we expect in terms of the economy and the coming up of the energy efficiency to be quite strong. Thanks a lot for the interventions, and I hope you found it interesting. We'll be in touch over the coming days. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great workshop.